Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are really honored to be here with all of you to welcome Ashby Combahee, Dartricia Rollins, Sukari Olawumi, Kwajelyn Jackson, Khye Tyson for a panel discussion called Post-Roe, What We Can Learn from Oral History and Archives. The panel is presented by Georgia Dusk, a Southern Liberation oral history project connecting the intersections of Black movement and cultural work in Atlanta, Georgia across generations. This event is co-hosted by the Feminist Women's Health Center and Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center. Feminist Women's Health Center is a reproductive health, rights, and justice organization. They provide direct services, including abortion care, and they provide education, advocacy, and leadership development opportunities. The mission of Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center is to bridge reproductive justice and reproductive health through resources, education, and support in order to strengthen the abilities of Black women, femmes, non-binary folks, and girls to make informed and liberating decisions about their bodies, families, and lives. So we're very, very glad to be here with all of you from around the world. We see folks in the virtual room shouting out. They are from rural Missouri, from San Francisco Bay. We got a lot of folks here tonight with us in the house from Atlanta and around Georgia. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Ashby and Dartricia to get us started. Welcome to you all.
Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Just want to make sure y'all can still hear me. Yes, I see it. That's awesome. So ER gave an introduction to who we are, Georgia Dusk. I'm one of the co-founders of the project, along with Dartricia. When we started this project, we had a guiding question, which is really, how can oral history be used as an organizing tool? As ER mentioned, Georgia Dusk is an intergenerational project, and our aim really is to document Black, queer, feminist organizers across Atlanta, across Georgia, as well as cultural workers. So we decided to do an oral history because we trust the voices of those on the ground doing the work. Largely, history has been a practice of top to bottom, and we wanted to switch that up, especially in such a historic moment, recognizing that our narrative can very easily get twisted. We want to make sure it gets corrected from the very beginning. So we're building an archive through the Oral History Project, which Dartricia and I have been collecting over the last year. The project is also held at the Spelman College Archive. So I want to shout out Holly Smith and all of our friends at Spelman College. Georgia Dusk is a project that will span across generations, and you can see some of that represented here tonight. This is only a handful of our participants, and I'm really grateful for the three of y'all for joining us. We are focusing now on reproductive justice because it feels most relevant right now, and that the two of us are in the weeds of it in many different aspects, but also recognizing that we are in a very vital moment of the movement. So that's been our focus for this iteration. Although we see our work really across the South, focusing on Atlanta and Georgia. And understanding that Atlanta is a significant site for reproductive health, rights, justice work. So following the overturn of Roe, it's more important than ever that we document where we are, where we were, and where we're going in the future, particularly in this fight for liberation.
Thanks, Ash. So I'm going to read my script because my memory is shot. But no, that was a really great introduction. So following the Supreme Court's 2022 decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, leaving it to the states to decide whether people had access to reproductive health care, tonight's discussion is on what would have been the 50th anniversary of the landmark decision, Roe v. Wade, and the impacts of Dobbs v. Jackson ruling on birth workers, abortion care providers, and organizers. Drawing on personal narratives and community histories of tonight's three participants, Kwajelyn Jackson, the Executive Director of the Feminist Women's Health Center, Khye Tyson, a doula and the founder of Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center, and Sukari Olawumi, an ultrasound tech and advocate at a local abortion clinic. We will discuss how we as a movement embody the four tenets of reproductive justice, the right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, the right to have children, the right to not have children, and the right to parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities to achieve reproductive liberation. We will play audio clips throughout the event to frame our discussion with the participants. And you can follow along with the audio via the printed handouts we provided right up here. Just don't get in the way of the camera. But with that, we're gonna get started.
So the first question that we asked that this audio is framing is, what did you relearn about yourself by doing oral history? So we're gonna listen to the audio and then we're gonna quiz it.
We're not gonna listen to the audio yet. Not yet.
Okay, you're right. I got a script that I need to follow.
Okay, but the question is, what did you all relearn about yourself by doing your oral histories?
Hi, I'm Kwajelyn. It's interesting that once you get talking, how things just begin to come forth, just emerge. Stories that maybe you didn't think that you would share just fit and just naturally come forth, especially if it is an environment where you feel safe and cared for by the people you're talking to. I can't think of anything really super specific that was that I relearned, but I think that was what was surprising, is that I didn't necessarily know exactly what story I had to tell. And even when invited to participate, I think it's not quite imposter syndrome, but this idea of I'm just out here doing stuff. I don't know that I have something that is archive worthy to share. And I think over the course of being in conversation, it began to feel more like my story is important and valuable, and I hope that it will naturally commingle with the other stories and histories that come forward.
Okay. My name is Sukari, most know me as Suki. I think what most resonated with me with telling my story is how far that I've come, the obstacles that presented themselves, and how big my community has gotten over the years. When, like Kwajelyn said, when you say it out loud, it's like, wow, growth came in all of the aspects and areas of my life that when you were going through those things, you did not have all of the resources and tools that you thought. But when you retold your story, they were right there. It could have been from your grandmother making tea cakes in the kitchen. It could have been a phone call with a friend. It could have been a hug from your mom or one of your children teaching you something. So it was very, exciting, and then it brought different emotions of a little bit of grief for me, but it also brought a lot of joy with knowing that somebody wanted to, like Kwajelyn said, hear like me, hear my story. What are you talking about? So it made it real. So
yeah, I'm Khye with Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center, and similar to what both of y'all said, it made me realize how all these random little things that I thought were little at the time kind of come together to weave this full story. And like you were saying, like your grandmother and family members and the people who raised me, it helped me to see how I was built for this. Which is really empowering, because I think that maybe not imposter syndrome, but maybe just, living in the society and people telling you in so many words that your contributions aren't worth anything. When you really look at the big picture and I look back on my life, I'm like, oh wow, okay, maybe I know a little bit more than I realized.
Yeah. y'all all know a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe we could share some of our reflections.
Yeah.
One, I think I'm really very, very grateful that you all decided to participate because I'm fans of all of you. And we knew that y'all had much to contribute. And one thing is, it's like an opportunity to pause, reflect, and something you can come back to. You, like we said, in your oral histories, you might record another one. Kwajelyn has actually already done one, and this one was different. And people grow rapidly. Things in the world change rapidly, and so your perspective changes. But I think even though we're all also like different ages, like parts of everybody's story resonated. I think talking about like Kwajelyn talking about her childhood, like things in there resonated. Suki talking about like leaving her job. I'm like, ooh, I remember what that was like stumbling out of like one really awful situation and not knowing what was next, and then like going into the thing that was like your purpose. And I'm not gonna give too much away because some of it is in the audio. And then Khye also just like talking about like, oh, I'm gonna apply for this, I'm gonna do this, I'm just gonna try these things out, and then just landing right exactly where you need it to be. And even if it wasn't at someone else's organization, creating your own organization, that is a really great contribution to our community. And then also like the building up to, we didn't even have to ask most of our questions because y'all just kind of like, everything culminates. Like your childhood, your life really does produce who you are today. And so y'all just like talked your way through this life story that made you into who you are today, which are birth workers, organizers, care workers, in all the different ways. So it was a really great experience for me.
Yeah, I mean, echoing everything Dartricia said, there were very clear themes that continue to pop up, which are part of how we organize the audio for tonight that y'all hear. And similarly, seeing myself in you. In all of your stories, we are rooted in Atlanta for this project, that's where we're at. And yet we were tying this Southern history of like from all regions, or all parts of the regions, and a very specific Black Southern identity that was being shaped through this oral history that makes y'all such impactful community members. Like it really influences the work that you do here within the movement. And so that those things became clearer and clearer, and it's actually exciting when we do more of the oral histories and we hear more of the themes coming up. It's like these are through lines. Like we truly are part of one. And I think with that, probably can talk a little bit about the first section of audio that we're gonna listen to. One of the questions that we asked y'all was, what does community look like for you? And it was necessary to hear like how y'all built communities, because we heard so many of the same organizations. I mean, Feminist came up in so many people's oral history. It's a very vital institution within our movement, and several others. And so what we'll hear from folks is mostly how y'all made community in RJ and what has reproductive justice as a movement meant to you all.
So even though I did not have reproductive justice language in my body, there was Black feminism that was present, you know. Reading Patricia Hill Collins, reading Bell Hooks, reading Audre Lorde, like those things were happening for me at Spelman. And so certainly some of that stuff was really unlocked at that period of time, understanding like how many different ways Black women get to show up in the world. And what things kinds of obstacles and barriers we continue to face. So I think that was probably a really big piece of it. But then certainly I think it got sharpened during the period of time at Wonderroot, because, you know, I think in particular the things that I learned working with Project South, like I went to their University Without Borders workshops, and you know, so I learned a ton there. And, you know, of course, Feminist Center had an abortion speak out at Wonderood, and Spark had their Fire Media Camp photo exhibit at Wonderood. And so just like those were the times where I felt like I got a lot more of an intersectional understanding. And like I said, at the same time, my mother was really in this like parallel path. She was at that point working for Planned Parenthood, and she was the vice president of diversity and inclusion and education. And so I was learning a lot through her as well, just in our conversations.
I go back and I'm working both at South Fulton, and this is when we had that horrible snowstorm where cars were stuck on the road, everything, and Feminist called and asked me to fill in for Gloria. My friend worked there, and this is not, this is my first time working in an abortion clinic. And I go through the door and I'm anxious and I'm nervous because I'm not knowing what to expect. And everybody is super friendly. And I'm thinking that I'm about to be walking in here to crying and sadness and gloom and doom. And it's the total opposite of all of that. It was just like this warm feeling of everybody showing the people that were waiting in the waiting area love. And I had worked in multiple hospitals. I had worked in multiple clinics at this time, GYN clinics, and had never felt this type of energy before. So I'm doing my ultrasounds and I go in the back and Dr. Middleton is standing there, and I introduced myself. We just clicked, and she was reading The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and we became best friends after that book. I was like, I want to work in a clinic like this. From there, my name got bounced around to Atlanta Women's Center. I went over there during the little snow again, and they offered me a job. So that's when I left Cartersville and went to start working in abortion care full time. It was just this sense of, I can't even explain it, like peace. Like I had found my community of not only folks that look like me, but had struggled like me or had experiences like me or wanted the best for their children like me, who were putting themselves first, thinking about their kids like I did, that cried like me, that listened to me, that validated what I had to say each time they came into my room. For me to do an ultrasound on them. And I had not at that time ever told my abortion story and didn't feel the need to tell them in that space at that time, but it was the start of me getting the courage to tell my story. Then I got introduced to the wonderful Oriaku, who started working at the clinic downstairs, and learning that they wanted to start what is now ARC.
Interested in reproductive justice, and for a while I was like, maybe I'll just find a job at an RJ organization, you know, Sister Song, or maybe I'll find an organizer job at, you know, one of these organizations. And yeah, that was kind of my plan for a while. So I did the Lulu Fellowship that started in January, I think, 2018, or like the first of the year, maybe not January, but it started at the beginning of 2018. So I was like, maybe this will, you know, I'll find a full-time job through there. And as I was doing the fellowship, I was learning more about RJ and more about, like, we talk about storytelling and data collection and all these different things. And I was realizing, like, all these different facets of RJ. It's not just abortion, and it's not just, you know, these handful of things. It's really expansive. And I was learning about environmental justice and all these different things. But I was still like, I don't know what I want to do. Yeah, I just realized how much I didn't know. And I think at some point in 2018, it all kind of clicked together. And I also was hearing about the maternal mortality crisis around 2017, 2018. And like all that just felt very close to home, I think, because my sister had her baby. And so like it was one thing for like older family members or like older folks I knew who were having kids, but then it kind of hit me like, oh, I'm in this age range now, like people who are parenting, and like even if me and my friends aren't having babies now, we will be in the next couple of years. And I don't know, it all clicked. And I think I was talking to one of my students, and she was pre-med. I remember that. We were talking about doulas one day, and she was like, yeah, I was thinking about becoming a doula. And I think that was the day that I was like, a doula, maybe I'll look into that.
And then here you are. So just sitting with that, I welcome reflections of what it's like to hear each other's audio, but I also want to ask you, how are we building communities? Coast Row, what type of community spaces do we need to be building and to be nurturing during this time?
I say we need education more than ever. First of all, we have to let folks know that there is still access to abortion. Abortion is not going away. There are people out on the ground every day fighting for access. You just have to change the narrative and be a little bit more patient and explain where you can go and educate what 6 weeks is, because most people don't even know that they're pregnant at 6 weeks. So they're like, what do you mean heartbeat? What do you mean I can't? And what do you mean? And what do you mean? And what do you mean? And you have to learn patience and not get angry with yourself, because you cannot help everyone. But in order to build a bigger community, education is the key. You've got to, especially with me, when I scan my patients and they're holding their breath until I tell them that they can stay, or if they have to go, their mind is literally turning and it's like, so I can stay? And I'm like, yes. But we have to also take that opportunity to explain to them when they're talking to their girlfriends, or when they're, talking to their daughters, or their daughters' friends are over, to be more cognitive of, hey, if you haven't missed a cycle, do a pregnancy test anyway. You know what I'm saying? You have to be proactive. Everybody doesn't have a regular cycle. Everybody chose to use protection. IUD doesn't keep you from getting pregnant. Your tubes tied doesn't keep you from getting pregnant. So you've got to educate everyone that you come in contact with, to let them know that just because this happened, that we are still fighting for you. And the more that you talk, the more that those words will grow into bigger spaces, into where people will get more fired up than what they were before. Because I'm telling y'all, there's some pissed off women right now, some pissed off folks who now want to know what they can do. They knew, but now they're like, hey, this is it. I've got to travel to a different state for 6 weeks, which is stupid. You know what I'm saying? Or I have to be turned away because I'm 6 weeks, 6 days, because you see a flicker. They can't make it resonate in their mind to make it make sense. But it's our job as a community to make it make sense for them, so they won't be forced into situations to give birth if they don't want to, or to be forced into situations where it's their life or the health of the fetus's life. Yeah. So education to me is most important in this.
I really think that the ongoing pandemic has made building community challenging. Because I know when I was really first starting in like movement work and social justice work, like a lot of the ways that I built community was just showing up to people's meetings and just, you know, somebody had something in a newsletter and I would just go and then I would, you know, figure out who I was gonna be there and, you know, try to be consistent and show my face and, you know, shake people's hands. And when you can't safely breathe around one another, it is hard to galvanize people in that way. And so I think that as the pandemic continues to evolve, we're certainly seeing more opportunities to gather in space together and figuring out ways to do that safely and figuring out ways to sort of use the in-person and the digital to like build relationships. But it takes, I think, additional commitment to make that happen. Like you have to really go out of your way. It's not, you can't be passive and just assume that community will just emerge around you. And I find that like in organizing work, like building sincere trust with people, it just aids the work. It just makes it more potent. You can work with people you don't like. It happens. We all do it all the time. But when you are like committed to and endeared to one another, when you feel like, you know, my liberation is bound up in yours, and or people who will, you know, speak your name in rooms that you're not in, like that kind of kinship, I think is a part of like the kind of like liberatory work that I want to be a part of, the kinds of like partnerships that I want to have with individuals and with organizations. Like not, you know, sort of uneven or like domineering, but really like symbiotic. You have things to bring, I have things to bring. You have things to learn, I have things to learn. Like that kind of relationship that I feel has been really valuable in my time doing reproductive justice and other community-facing work.
Yeah, I love this question. And what came to mind was that community should be, and for me, I try to make community be a space where I practice building the world that I want to see, in a space where I'm with people that I can trust, people that I feel vulnerable around, people that I can say, hey, can we try this other type of communication? Or there's a conflict, how can we address this in a way that acknowledges everyone's humanity and is, you know, empathetic and all these different things. Like how can, and even with the pandemic and not being able to gather like we usually do, what does it look like to still have purposeful community if you have to put something in the mail or give someone a phone call or have a Zoom call? If we can, yes, we still can build community. It's just very different than what it was 5 years ago. And the adjustment, the constant adjustment, I think is also, community is a safe place to do that and to kind of tweak things and figure out what works and what doesn't work. To have that space for grace and forgiveness and experimentation with people who you trust.
Thank y'all. I'm gonna add my own comment. Shameless plug. Two things. One thing that was in all of y'all's oral histories, which you already said, but it was also in the audio, was Feminist Women's Health Center as a space. I'm not trying to put this all on you, Kwajelyn, but I think like also we did an event in September in celebration of feminists to fundraise for y'all to own your building, and we had a really good conversation around the importance of feminist spaces. And then the second thing is we're in a feminist space, Charis, Charis Books and More and Charis Circle, which is like also like where we kind of found the idea for this project. And I think what y'all also named and what you named, Kwajelyn, is showing up places when people are hosting events. Like people are here tonight. I hope that y'all will talk to someone about how you can do more for the reproductive justice movement. But those are the kind of things like, and I think like one pivot that we had to do was virtual. I think that's something that Charis has done really well to continue to be in community with folks and find different ways to partner. Or even early in the pandemic, Kuluntu did an event with Charis. The Feminist Women's Health Center continues to do events with Charis. And we have to nurture the spaces that we already have, because they'll go away. And people just like assume that they'll be here forever, but they won't.
Atlanta stay changing.
Atlanta stay changing. Atlanta stay changing. I mean, Charis used to be in Little 5 Points. We can't be there anymore. We're over here. Like, it's cool, but like people just assume. And then when places disappear, it's like, oh, I missed that.
Yeah.
Or like, I can't believe y'all are going out of business. I can't believe this is happening. But like, you have to actually show up for your community and show up for your community spaces, because that is how that's how we all got here.
That's right.
Yeah. And so I think that like when we're thinking about what community means for us, we have to think holistically, like, where can we go and gather?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's important. Like, yes, meeting up virtually, important, especially to keep each other safe. But meeting up in person is a very different experience. And meeting up in a place that feels special and it feels home for you is very important. And we're losing it every single day.
Yeah, that's true. That's right.
All right. So also, Suki almost made me cry, and now we're all about to be crying. So I'm just gonna preface. So our next audio. So in 2021, when we were imagining what Georgia Dusk could be, we decided pretty early on that we would focus on reproductive justice, organizers and birth workers. Emphasis on birth workers, because I think that was something that we noticed that was like really missing. And like understand reproductive justice, we understand it as a very much holistic thing. The tenets of reproductive justice are very clear. Are we doing it? I don't know. But RJ community was organizing around the Dobbs versus Jackson court case, and we were already predicting, like folks were already predicting the fall of Roe. And so in June, while Ash and I were at GSU, we were in the archives looking at NARAL's collection, like building up our research for this project, is when we found out the news that Roe had fallen. And so the moment that we all feared was here. And by September, so we gave it a little space. So like we knew in 2021, but we were like, we gotta like know more. We gotta do more research. We gotta think about this more. We have to think about like truly how we're gonna build this collection. Like we know the people, like we know there are plenty of people that we can talk to, and hopefully we're gonna talk to everybody because we're trying to build a full body collection. But we just wanted to make sure that we were very much early on being intentional about embodying the tenets of reproductive justice. And so we began doing our interviews and began capturing communities' responses to the fall of Roe. And so the question that we asked you all, which was, what have been the challenges before and after the Dobbs v. Jackson decision to overturn Roe v. Wade? And these are some of the responses. And speaking of the earth moving under our feet, so now we're here in 2022.
Sure.
And Roe v. Wade has been overturned. And so I'm a little curious about, you know, there's been big moments in reproductive rights where it's been like, Roe is going to be overturned. Like it's not like it was a new thing, like you've been hearing it. And I'm curious about like what in this moment felt like, oh no, this is really actually happening. And then the moment of like, oh no, it's actually happened.
I mean, I felt sure that it was going to happen when I listened to oral arguments in the Supreme Court. When I listened to it, I was like, this is a wrap for the team. I mean, I low-key felt like with the last couple of confirmations, I was like, this might be a wrap for the team. But like listening to oral arguments felt particularly like slicing. Like I took particular umbrage with this way that the conservative justices were comparing this case to, you know, the landmark cases that reversed, you know, racist policies. and like protecting the unborn was equivalent to, you know, affirming the humanity of Black people. I was just like, y'all, if you all could take those things back, you would. So don't pretend like, anyway, those are the things that really made me the maddest. But I feel like the writing has been on the wall for abortion for a really long time. And, you know, just watching the ways that state legislatures were intentionally trying to throw as many blatantly unconstitutional laws out as possible so that they could try to get one to get to the Supreme Court. Like, it felt, I was surprised that anybody was surprised that that was the strategy. That they're like, change the lower courts, change the circuit courts, change the Supreme Court, and have a pipeline of bills that can go. Yeah. I think maybe the leak was sort of the other, like, this is happening. So it felt like there was no turning back. Like, it's happening and it's gonna happen this way. There was, I think, maybe a couple of people who had like, oh, well, the leak was just to test how the, you know, public will react and maybe they'll backtrack and it won't be as bad. I was like, no, it's out here now. This is it. So it's hard to really capture how I feel about all of it. I mean, I think that we haven't really seen the worst of it yet. I've also always really been very impressed by the resilience of our movement, and like there is a way that abortion providers have had to be nimble for such a long time and have had to sort of like, we're adjusting to new restrictions all the time. But I think for the rest of the country to really recognize how what I believe are going to be the long lasting implications of this, like that's the part that I continue to be, I guess, surprised about. Like, I know that I'm entrenched in this work in a different way than like my friends who don't do movement work at all or don't do repro work, but just like the fact that everybody sort of like moved on at this point, like in, you know, September, October, like now that they've had a few months of, okay, well, Roe is over, and everybody's again just sort of like, well, I guess it's just normal for you to have to fly to California for an abortion. I guess that's just the way you get abortions, is you go to New Jersey.
How is it impacting feminists now?
The Supreme Court decision happened on June 24th, and in the days immediately following the Dobbs decision, we had hundreds and hundreds of calls that we could not staff the phone center sufficiently to actually answer all of the calls that were coming in. And during the period of time between June 24th and July 20th, we saw probably 40, 50 patients a day, give or take, maybe more, because we were trying to help absorb some of the need around the Southeast. Just for more context, before Dobbs, we were probably averaging between 20 and 30 patients a day. And then during that window, 40 to 50. And now it's like 10 to 12, maybe.
I felt like lesser of a person when Roe failed. It was like, I felt like I was invisible. And it hurt so bad, so bad. But I remember sitting in the back and I was on the phone in the clinic, and that was the first time that I actually cried. And I cried so hard, like I was inconsolable, like, because we had a patient, no, this was before. I had a 13-year-old who was sexually assaulted, and she spoke Spanish. Her mother didn't speak any English. And the minors, I always adopt them as my children when they're there. And I said, do you want me to hold your hand? And the detective was swabbing her cheek. I remember her going back out there with her mom because we were waiting to go to surgery. And I was cussing in that hallway. And I was like, this just doesn't make any bleepity bleep sense. because, you know, y'all are about to take us to 6 weeks. You're about to try to force this 13-year-old to be a mom, to be ridiculed, to be picked on, to be labeled as fast when it had nothing to do with it. Y'all don't care, men suck. This detective's in there. And he comes and looks around the corner, and I'm like, I don't give a shit. You know, everybody should be as angry as I am because y'all just don't get it. You do not get it. I said, you aren't going to have to look in the faces to these folks and tell them that they can't get done what they need to get done. Fast forward, we take the little girl into the OR, and I'm holding her hand before she goes to sleep. I asked her a question, and she said today would be the day that she would be graduating, going into middle school from elementary school. And as soon as she goes to sleep, I start bawling again because it's like you had to miss your party to have an abortion because somebody wanted to be an asshole and take advantage of you. And so I remember telling her before she went to sleep that we're going to celebrate her when she wakes up. So she goes into the recovery room. I run over to Sprouts. Her favorite color was pink. They only have this sprinkly cake. So I took that over there, and me, her, and her mom, and the Spanish translator were in there having cake with her when she was able to be in recovery. I just wanted to bring some joy to that little girl because of this was not just the abortion, but she had to go through the trial also, thinking of what she had to go through there. And then fast forward to the 6-week ban and seeing people sit on my table and actually hold their breath until I'm through doing their ultrasound for me to tell them yes or no. Then when me telling them that they're okay to stay, them asking me, but what does that mean? Because they cannot flip and grasp what I'm telling them that it's okay to proceed. Like their mind is literally trying to understand this. And I'm like, how am I going to be able to deal with this day in and day out? Day in and day out of seeing somebody holding their breath, seeing somebody cry, seeing somebody who's traveled all the way from Mississippi, Louisiana, and we have to tell them when you go back across state lines, please don't tell anybody that you've had an abortion because you can be prosecuted for it. Like me having to educate folks that look like me, brown folks, people of color, period, of what to do and what not to do. And me being fearful for these people every time they leave out of that door to get to go back home. It's mind-boggling. It just makes me so angry. It made me have to go back to therapy because I was, you know, I'm not an angry person, but to just have all of this anger and I didn't know how to release it and I didn't like who I was because it was changing me. I love ultrasound. I wake up every morning never saying, I don't want to go to work. I don't love what I do. I love what I do. I knew from the time that my dad died and those nurses helping me and my brother that I knew that I was supposed to be in the medical field. It shifted, but it shifted to where I was truly needed and to do the most beneficial work. And for somebody to tell me that I can't help people, I just didn't know how to deal with that.
Yeah, I think listening to that was necessary to remind us human impact that this has. And I think it's so easy for those of us who aren't directly in the work to hear news stories and think about it all in a political realm. This has a very tangible impact, not only on those who are actively seeking abortions, but those who provide it, those who care for them.
Even though we already recorded it, thank you, Suki. we cried so hard during that interview. I'm about to cry now, and I'm not a crier for the people who know me. But yeah, like the impact of Roe falling, like we feel it immediately, but like there's still so much more to come. And I think, like, as y'all can see, like we're trying to build towards this conversation that we're having. And so, yeah, it's been 7 months now. I think it's been about 7 months since Roe fell and the 6-week ban has gone into effect in Georgia. And now that we are experiencing some of the immediate impacts, how do we build a long-term struggle? Specifically, as folks who are outside of organizing in general, and RJ organizing and work in particular, folks are in the streets less and they've become complacent, and they have accepted this as the new normal. And so, yeah, how do we build a long-term struggle? Because no, people can't just fly across the world to get an abortion. We already know abortion in the first place was pretty expensive. Now trying to travel to get one, even more expensive. And so I'm leaning on y'all's wisdom. Maybe even the question is like, what do y'all want to see from people? As folks that are doing this work every day, what do you want? How do you want the community to be showing up?
So we talk a lot about resilience, and I've talked about it even in my storytelling. Resilience is great, but resilience is also a trick because it teaches us how to like accept our own oppression. Like we just get good at surviving it, and then that sort of just replaces the pre-existing status quo. We find a way to like scratch out comfort, and then we move on. I think that figuring out how to, I don't know, simultaneously survive. Like I don't fault anybody for like adjusting. We have to, as clinics, we had to adjust to the law in order to stay open so that there would be any abortions at all. And we also cannot like sort of resign to this being acceptable. And so I also say all the time, like as like sort of one of my organizing principles is like rage and fear are not sufficient to sustain us. I think that rage is very important, and that like being able to activate your anger and work through and use it as a catalyst is critical, but like it burns out quickly. Rage is lighter fluid. It'll ignite, but you can't heat your house with lighter fluid. It will not burn like oil will. So I just think that like being able to find ways to plug into something that is more sustainable, that is like, I find that like being able to look towards a real vision of what's possible. So that wasn't what you asked me for, but I think that like figuring out how to plug in to community, like we talked about before, and align with sort of existing movements where folks are working and polishing strategies. Like I don't think that we can always be in the streets. I don't think that's the only strategy that we can use, especially like when we see what we are met with. You know, last night in Point, like I think that we cannot rely upon that all the time. And you know, there is also a way that, particularly in repro, I find a lot of dissatisfaction in marches and rallies. I don't think that I don't think they're useless, but at some point they're kind of a parade. It's kind of, the police are escorting us down the street, and that doesn't feel revolutionary to me at all. And so I guess I just want to figure out the short answer to what folks can do. Like, many of our organizations are still scrambling to try to pay our people fairly as we watch our revenues drop, and try to fight with philanthropy, which is, just fancy money laundering, and just figure out how to survive. And so I don't think that there's any shame in saying the only thing you can do is cut a check. Like, open your pocketbook, that's fine. That is a worthy action to take. But Georgia legislative session has started in full gear. I don't necessarily think that, again, like, policy change is the singular or most important strategy towards our liberation either, but it is also not a useless tool. And so being able to not only understand like what's happening at the state legislature, at the city council, at the county commission, like understand what's happening, and be sort of more in touch with not just what they're saying in those halls, but like what happens in the communities afterwards. I don't even know if this is a really coherent, like, it's not a call to action. It's just me sort of grappling with this way that like, we cannot be complacent. We cannot rest on our laurels. We cannot sit and accept what has been presented to us as progress. And so, there's lots of really powerful organizing that is happening. It's happening every single day. It's happening right now while we're sitting in here. So being able to plug in, to get connected, to read about the kinds of liberation struggles that have happened in other places around the world, and bring those things into what's happening in Georgia, in Atlanta, in Mississippi, those are some of the things that I think that are coming to mind.
When Roe fell, I was angry because I couldn't go out and be in the street. And I had to realize that the work that I was doing inside the clinic was just as important.
That's right.
But everyone in this room can wear multiple hats like I do. Just because I do ultrasound does not mean that I was on the board of ARC Southeast for many years. I partner with Amplify, I partner with Spark, I do stuff with Feminist. This is now going to be, Khye's going to be part of my community now, and I just met Khye. So you just have to, we as a collective have to have, again, conversations and let folks know that there are organizations out here that help. If you have time, you can drive somebody to the clinic.
Yes.
You can sit with their child while they're in there getting the procedure. You can bring some food to the clinic workers who oftentimes
skip lunch.
Exactly.
Regularly.
Every day. Those type things, but in order for us to, again, build and be stronger, we have to have these conversations and be in spaces where people not just talk the talk, but they walk the walk every single day. And just invite different organizations to come to, you can have something at your house and just say, hey, listen to what these folks have to say, or get the information and pass it around and just talk. We've got to constantly stay in conversation with people about different folks that do good work every single day. But like Kwajelyn said, a lot of these organizations, if you don't have time, write a check, because that money will go a long way, and it goes exactly to where and what the folks need.
Yeah, I appreciate what both of y'all said. Like, I feel like you stole my comment. It's all good. But no, I was just thinking about, like you were saying, like, marching out in the street isn't the only way to show up. And I know a lot of people will, like you were saying, like this lighter field, they'll get angry and like, I want to go to a march, or I want to, post something on social media or whatever. But really what folks I think what's easy to forget and what folks need to always come back to is who is currently leading this movement. This work has been happening for literally hundreds of years, and there are folks who are currently doing this work that need those resources, that need the money, that need food, that need volunteers, that need people to amplify the message. And how can you look at what the movement needs and your particular strengths, your particular purpose, your particular goals in your life, what you're good at, and find a marriage, find something that works for both. Because I'll be the first person to tell you, I'm not the front lines person. I'm not going to be at the rally. I'm not going to be at the march. Don't ask me to go. But there are so many other things that I know how to do, that I do well, that fit within my personality type and my temperament and all of that. And I think sometimes people see like, I don't want to be at the march, or I can't be at the march, or the march is not accessible to me. And that kind of being the end of the thought process. But we all have a role to play, and it's going to take creativity. It's going to take ingenuity. It's going to take this continually evolving technology and continually evolving information that we have at our fingertips to be able to address this and to move forward in a way that really sees all of our sovereignty. And so we can't only do this on a shoestring budget. We can't only do this with the same 10 people who have been doing it, because maybe we burn out.
We would love to sit down.
We are burnt out. If you're waiting on us to save folks, we are tired. And the way that the war is waged against us is meant for us to burn out. It's meant for us to get sick and die. It's meant for us to do that.
That's right.
And so even if you are not on the front lines, what can you do to help replenish the folks who have been doing this work for years, for decades, for generations? Some folks have been doing this work for 50 years.
That's right.
And they still feel like they can't retire. So, what are the ways that you, your friends, the people that you're close to can replenish the work that's already being done and can fortify the work that's already being done?
Yes.
And, where's your place? Where can you fit in?
And I can honestly say that just the conversation and places that I talk about what I do, people see the passion and the drive that I have. They want a piece of that. Well, what is Suki? I did not start in ARC Southeast being on the board. I tried to run away from it as far as possible. I ran away from every speaking engagement, and I just began to be, Suki will be good at this. Go apply for this, and it's like no. And here I am, and then it's because my name will get thrown into different things, and people will gravitate to me. Well, what are you doing? I know nothing about abortion. I know nothing about funding. I know nothing about this. I know nothing about that. And they see how excited I am, so they want to, pour into my cup and let me pour into theirs. So it's all about, like I said, just, using what you have, but also, like you said, you get burned out, but you are passionate about the next person that you can help, the next person. For my granddaughters who are 3 and 2 months, I want them to be able to have the things that I have and more, but I want it to be safe. I want it to be sustainable. I want it to be everything, but I know that I have to do the work, and it takes other folks to do the work also. So I'm always preaching and telling everybody about every fund, every movement, everything, just because the more that I say it, the more that people will continue to talk about it, and it won't burn out.
And I think what we also have to be reminded of is that the Supreme Court, when we got Roe, was majority conservative, and they didn't just give us Roe because they wanted to. It's because folks demanded it consistently. People struggled for it. People provided abortions no matter fucking what. And so I really appreciate the work that y'all do, and I hear it, like, people are tired, and we're gonna continue to be tired. Yep, because they just keep taking. And we just gonna keep demanding.
That's right.
And we're gonna keep fighting. And like, more than anything, consistent struggle.
That's right.
And like, everyone has to opt in. Because as Kwajelyn said, like, our liberation is bound together. And so no one gets to sit this out. You can find a place. It could be education. It could be doing political education. It could be going to the marches. It could be going to legislative sessions. I ain't gonna be in a legislative session.
You ain't gotta go.
Exactly. But I'm gonna do something else. Somebody
can hold the babies to allow for somebody else to go.
Exactly. And so I think that is a really important thing that a lot of people forget when we talk about being an organizer. You can find a thing.
Yeah.
Join an organization first and foremost. And struggle with folks and learn from people and be consistent. And lend
Read a
helping
book.
hand. Please read a book.
Read a book or two.
Please read a book. And if you can't read a book, listen to audio. Audiobooks are reading.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to remind our audience of the 4 tenets of reproductive justice, which are the right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, the right to have children, the right to not have children, and the right to parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. The maternal mortality rate for Black birthing people is too fucking high. Hospitals that overwhelmingly serve the Black community are getting shut down by so-called nonprofits because they're not turning a high enough profit.
Right. Right.
And people don't even have safe and clean housing, if they even have housing at all.
Wow.
And so something that I think you all get at really well in your interviews and your storytelling are the ways in which anti-Blackness is perpetuated, whether it be articulated by legislators and policymakers and anti-choice protesters or corporate interests. They're doing more than attacking the right to abortion, and that our communities need more than the right to abortion. And so yeah, we'll play some audio because I think y'all did a really great job.
That's not designed to do anything but cause more harm. Because you aren't trying to do anything to make my community better. You aren't giving my community more resources. You aren't giving my community more affordable health care, affordable daycare, being able to have the ability to have healthy babies, be able to have the ability, if I do have a special needs child, that a daycare in my facility that can take care of this child. You're not giving me the need or the want to get, I'm sick, because people can be pregnant and sick the entire 9 months, to be able to be guaranteed that I will have a job or be able to be off with paid leave, not FMLA. You aren't doing that. So everybody that comes in my room that I can help within reason, according to the state of Georgia, I'm gonna help them.
You named during the SCOTUS hearings, they were using a lot of like the landmark cases against racism. And what I also noticed about the protesters outside is they use a lot of language around Black Lives Matter, and they use a lot of like racially charged language around like how Black people have been systemically oppressed as a way to attack abortion. And I'm just very curious about your perspective of that, because I think that's a very necessary analysis.
Yep, it is intentional and it's awful. I mean, the people who have, in almost every other instance where there have been opportunities to invest in the well-being of Black communities, have either neglected or like intentionally, divested from those opportunities, but will use sort of the facade of caring about Black babies in order to make abortion seem harmful. The protesters outside the building are constantly asking us, don't you think black babies matter? Don't you think black lives matter? Don't you care about Margaret Sanger? I do love talking about Margaret Sanger. It's literally a favorite song. Like, just throwing it out all the time. But there's zero other evidence that they've done anything to improve the lives of black children, black parents. There's no congruence. Those people are not protesting the black people who are on death row and petitioning for their lives to be saved, to be valued, to be honored, to be protected. They're not even invested in the maternal mortality crisis that we find ourselves in. So there's not even a willingness to acknowledge the interventions necessary to protect Black pregnancy, Black birthing outcomes, to honor people's like birthing experiences and the desires that they have.
So then I'm looking at the maternal mortality crisis. I'm looking at the erasure of queerness and the gender essentialism in birth spaces. And I see those as like, I see how scaring people with maternal mortality crisis language or like, these are the bad things that are happening, how that results in people wanting to have fewer children or people wanting to not have children at all.
Okay. I'm gonna stay on topic. No, so obviously we had to like narrow down our clips. We can't play all the audio for y'all, but we understand reproductive justice as a model for its intersectional framework that should challenge white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. Also understanding that capitalism is what produces patriarchy and white supremacy.
Absolutely.
And so, are we living up to these principles of liberation? But what would it look like to put the tenets of reproductive justice into practice? And I'm looking for one thing in particular. I'm just gonna say it. Kwajelyn, I think you like articulated really well in a piece of audio around the ways that the Feminist Health Center is trying to expand y'all's work to meet all the needs and to like really encompass what reproductive justice could look like in practice. And obviously, like Khye's work does that. Like it is a full breadth of RJ. Like it's covering everything. And another thing I'll add before I like be quiet, so you have to answer the question, is that we had turned the recording off and then we had to turn it back on because Suki has some really impactful stuff to say. In particular around the closing of the Atlanta Medical Center, especially Suki coming from a background in hospital work and then moving into, smaller clinic work and more so focusing on abortion access. I think what y'all all named are the things that our community needs. Like we need healthcare. And I think it is articulated in those tenets of reproductive justice around the ability to parent in a safe and sustainable community. You need healthcare for that. You need housing for that. You need the police to stop killing people for that. And so, yeah, I'm just curious about like, what do y'all think about like those principles being put into practice? Khye, you wanna go first?
Yeah. My greatest wish for us as Black people who live in this country is to be left alone. Like, leave us alone. Leave us alone, leave us alone, leave us alone. So like, it's so hard for me to answer that question, like, what are we doing? Like, we're doing our best. We're doing our best. And every corner we turn, there's a barrier that is, I would venture to say 99% of the time, man-made, human-made,
That's right.
and unnecessary.
Mhm.
And like the world I envision is Black people being left alone to be sovereign and to twerk in peace. Like that's really what I want. And for us to look out for each other, for us to protect each other, to inform each other of I think about bodily autonomy, and I think about how so many people are deprived of an education about how our bodies function.
That's correct.
I'm not even talking about pregnancy. I'm not even talking about abortion. I'm talking about children who have no idea what's happening with their bodies, who turn into adults who have no idea what's happening with their bodies.
Correct.
Folks are still, perpetuating these incorrect or harmful ideas about sex.
Yes.
And it just blows my mind. And I really what would it look like if we were left alone and we were able to educate ourselves and each other about how our bodies work, about how to relate to each other in healthy ways. Like all these very simple, dare I say, things that we have been deprived of very purposefully for hundreds of years. And that we was minding our business and they came and got us. And ever since then it's just been obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, and I'm gonna stop there before I start getting real heated.
So we're trying some stuff. Feminist Center was founded in 1976, and we have always done more than just abortion care. But I think for several years preceding Dobbs and everything that has come from the Supreme Court decision last year, we have been thinking about what are the ways that we can more fully make reproductive justice tangible in clinical spaces. And we are certainly not the only people who are thinking about that, who are studying that, who are experimenting with that. So trying to build out more services that care for more moments in time across a lifespan, more experiences that people have and want to have, being able to really support people even in some of what Khye said, in learning about how our bodies function and how they function in a variety of ways, and that there's not one sort of single standard normal, that we really need to learn about the spectrum of ways that bodies work. So I really want to, we can't do everything, but we want to make sure that folks who are thinking about their well-being and their sexuality, their ability to determine how their families will grow, that we are able to play a role in helping to support that. So terminating pregnancy or supporting pregnancies to happen, being able to support people after they have had a child through that postpartum period, which we know is a critical period of time, where the person who has given birth is often not prioritizing their own well-being in favor of making sure that their infant has everything that they need. And the laws had aligned with that mentality for a very long time. So we've been doing a lot of work, and I've invited experts from around the country, like Khye, to come and help inform what are the possibilities? What are we imagining for reproductive justice in clinical spaces? I have lots of critique of how healthcare functions and how nonprofits function, and a lot of those things have really been, I've been spending a lot of time with Dartricia Jackson, who's the interim executive director of ARC Southeast, who talks about revolutionary critique and how we need to use criticism as a way to sharpen and improve and better align with where we want to be in the future. But like, I have a lot of critiques about like how healthcare works and like how, I mean, how can we subvert or dismantle or push up against some of the limitations of like how healthcare works in the United States in particular. And then what are the things that we need to like move through? So I don't know that I have like the solution for what reproductive justice can feel like, but I know I want to keep trying stuff. And I know I want to hear from people what they want and need, and I want us to be able to evolve and adapt to meet that need. And we will never abandon abortion care, but it cannot be the only thing that we do because it's not the only thing that people need. And so like keeping that in context all the time of like, we are gonna fight tooth and nail for abortion, but it can't suck all the air out of the room. We're not gonna be able to breathe into the other things that we want to be able to provide for people. So yeah, I think that those are the ways that we're trying to really take the tenets seriously. And also just understanding, like, again, I'm gonna keep going back to this community question because I think it's so critical. Like, we can't do it alone. Like one institution is not sufficient to like meet the collective need. And so it has to be an ecosystem. It has to be like a shared responsibility. And it has to be a way that we can like work in partnership with one another to make the experience of our community, our comrades, like that they have the easiest and kindest experience possible. That's really what I want. I don't want Feminist Center to like own anything. Like we just want to play a role, just like we're asking individuals to play. Like we want the organizations and institutions to also play a role. So
I got lost in what they were saying. The question just went, I'm like, just anyway. Tell me the question.
Yeah. What would it look like to put the tenets of reproductive justice into practice? And I think this is also like, it's some imagining work. Like, I don't expect anyone to have all the answers, and we're learning every single day.
Right.
And so it is really like what would I want this to look like?
In my world, for me to show up and be able to do what I need to do without any stigma, any shame, any of those things, and just be in a space where it's just so much love and joy, like when I got introduced into this type of work. So we have a long way to go, but like Kwajelyn and Khye said, you know, we're gonna show up, but don't look at me if I show up differently. Don't look at me if I show up angry. Don't look at me and judge me because my arms are crossed, because I'm pissed. But just continue to know that I am gonna show up, that I am gonna give it my all, and that there will be love and joy felt even when I'm showed up with, you know, being pissed off.
That's right.
So yeah, I think when you asked that question, when we were sitting there, I was like, y'all really want me to answer this question? And I feel like that again today, but yeah, that's just let me show up and care for, you know, my patients. Let me show up and give them the type of care that they deserve, that they need. Because abortion is healthcare. I don't care what anybody says, it's healthcare. And folks need to realize that and understand that, and be willing to not be afraid to say that, because so many folks are afraid to even say the word abortion. And to put abortion and healthcare in the same sentence, everybody's clutching their pearls like, did she just say that? You know, that's not right. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I know when we asked the question, Suki was like, I don't feel no hope. Heard, felt, no. All right, we have one more piece of audio.
Yeah. Thank y'all for indulging the dreaming. I feel like the dreaming is as necessary as the as to strategizing, but for me, on the oral history perspective, like documenting what y'all are doing obviously was essential because I think this provides a guidebook for the next generation. The same way that Dartricia and I were in the archives looking at the work of generations before us, Sister Songs archives, we were looking at Black Women's Health Project archives, seeing the type of work that was happening in this very city. And what's also interesting is that it repeats a lot of what y'all are saying, particularly this education piece, particularly mamas educating their Black daughters about their bodies and not just like biologically what happens within the stigma of it. They were talking about this 50 years ago. And so this dreaming is really important. And I think it's the part that makes me, we intentionally decided to end the oral histories with the dreaming. And so we'll play the last audio for y'all, which is from Tamika Middleton, who is not here tonight, but yeah, she had an incredible oral history. We were really excited that we got to document her. So Tamika Middleton, she is,
what does reproductive liberation look like? I mean, I think reproductive liberation only exists inside of a broader liberation framework. It only exists inside of a world where we're free in all the aspects, right? I don't have control over my own body if I don't also have access to food. You know what I'm saying? If I don't also have a place to live. And so I think that the quest, the ultimate goal is liberation, period. And that looks like a truly democratic society where we have self-determination, individually and collectively. But our individual self-determination is we recognize how it's tied up in the self-determination of our folks. And so we are not self-determining in ways that harm, encroach upon the freedoms of, et cetera, our folks. And we see ourselves, there was something, I just watched this video with Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and she said something about like radical dependency being key to liberation. And I was like, come through, Ruthie always comes through. That I think is something that feels inherently necessary for this broader picture of liberation. That is like, abolition cannot exist if we don't see how we depend on each other, right? Because we continue to harm each other if we don't see how we are each necessary to each other. And so I think reproductive liberation cannot exist if we don't see how we are dependent on each other.
And reproductive liberation is liberation, period.
Yeah.
And we didn't get to introduce, so Tamika is not here, but Tamika is a doula, a midwife apprentice, abolitionist, and mother who responds to our question, which you all responded to. But yeah, if y'all have anything that y'all would like to say, you may, or we can also open it up to audience questions virtually and in room.
Yeah, we have some questions, so.
People got questions.
People have questions. Our virtual friends have questions, so I do want to voice them and then also invite our folks who are physically in the room with us. So I'm going to begin with a very simple one, which is I want to know if there is any talk around having men get contraceptives.
I mean, I don't know. I don't work in like R&D of any pharmaceutical company, so I don't really know the answer. But I mean, I think that that's being studied all the time. I will also say that one of the many other services that we're trying to develop at Feminist Center is access to vasectomies and tubal ligations for people who want them. So there's certainly ways that people across the gender spectrum can, take steps to control their reproduction in the ways that they see fit. And we know that there are other places where people are being denied access to that kind of care, and so we want to make it as accessible and affordable as we can. But yeah, I don't know.
So Erica Kane's.
hold on.
Yeah, you got more.
Mhm. I just think that's a reductive question. Like, I'm trying to I'm not here as an employee either. But I just think that question is it's like something that we see on social media that is not productive. And I'm not trying to denigrate anyone, but I don't take that as a serious question.
I think they're asking it seriously.
I'm not receiving it.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So Erica Kane says, in relation to internationalism, there are still some left nations that have yet to get a referendum passed on abortion. Yet we know abortions are happening. Has there been consideration in studying or being in communication with how this is able to happen? Thinking alongside the framework of internal colonization and how certain similarities can be a springboard for organizing.
So is the question how are people continuing to have abortions in places where abortion has been restricted?
Yes.
I mean, that's been happening since the beginning of time. People have always controlled their pregnancy outcomes. People have used many different methods to terminate pregnancy when they needed to. And that continues to happen whether it is illegal or illegal and so yes, there are folks who are working in global ways to learn. There was a group of folks who spent time in Nicaragua. I think it had to be 2018. I can't remember. But there certainly are ways that folks are learning about what strategies folks are using on the ground to care for each other and to care for themselves. Certainly the ways that the growth and popularity of medication abortion was certainly learned from a global context because other countries were using these pills and we're using it word of mouth. We're getting it in community. We're not necessarily getting it through formal channels before it became FDA approved and they changed the labels and all those kinds of things. And there's still ways that we continue to learn. I think across movements, it is important for us to not use this tiny United States lens to inform how we should be acting on behalf of our folks. There is thousands of years of history that we can learn from, and there are countries all around the world, continents around the world that we can continue to learn from, who have a lot of solutions.
Yeah, and Erica goes on further to say the question is really, are y'all in conversation with some of these international groups?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Does anyone here want to ask a question before I ask our final virtual question? All right. Just flip that up.
Don't ask any hard questions.
Ooh. So I think one thing that's coming up a lot in this is this theme of dependence on each other and trust in each other. And this is one of these things that I can struggle with a lot on this question of how do we build trust, in particular, how do we build trust in a way that isn't easily co-optable, that isn't something that people who are not actually trustworthy can just copy the signs of without having the true meaning of it. And so in this work of reproductive justice, it seems so vital to have. So I'm curious what the panelists, how they approach this question of building that trust.
This is building community is one of my favorite things to talk about because it is not easy, and we pretend like it is. Like you can, one of my favorite things to do on social media is watch the argument between like new parents and grandparents. And the grandparents are like, I don't want to raise your kids. And the kids are like, well, you dropped me off at grandma's house in the summer. How dare you? And like, it's a back and forth. And like, I think on both sides, there's this assumption of community. On the younger person's part, there's an assumption of, well, I had to babysit my younger cousins, or, you know, I went to grandma's house, so I can just do the same thing. And on the parent side, it's the assumption of, well, I'm retired, or I'm about to retire, or I'm at this point in my life. Don't you want me to, you know, have ease and joy and all these different things? And it's a miscommunication. And I think one of the biggest things with building community is having shared values, having the ability to communicate those values and be on the same page as far as this is what I want to build in my personal life or in the world at large, whatever it is. And I think building trust and vulnerability kind of go hand in hand. Like you have to trust someone to be vulnerable with them, but you don't know if you can trust them until you're vulnerable with them. So it's kind of a chicken and egg kind of thing. But I really think that it's hard to co-opt or to pretend to be vulnerable or to pretend to be trustworthy. Like, I don't know how to like, but yeah, it's hard to pretend to do that. If you are really about that life, if these are really your values, or if they're not your values, it's gonna show.
Yes.
If you're actually showing up and you're being in space with people and you are building radical community. Like, because I think conflict is one of the big things that undoes a lot of communities also. And how do you address conflict? That's where people's true colors will show in a lot of spaces. So yeah, you can pretend to be trustworthy, but as soon as something hits the fan, that's when a lot of people's facades fall away. And so it's being in community and moving with folks is really one of the only ways to eventually see who they really are. And I think that saying all that, it goes back to don't be vulnerable with people that you don't trust, or don't be vulnerable with people that you don't think you can trust, or you don't have any, positive signs that you can trust them. I think sometimes that's really, I think that's love bombing. I think that's actually love bombing, an abusive technique of, I'm going to show you all this love, but I'm not necessarily going to be vulnerable with myself. I'm not going to necessarily make sure that you trust me before I show you all this love. I'm just going to show up and love bomb you. And so I think the difference between the authenticity and folks who are just trying to, be where it's hot right now, or where the spotlight is really just, it comes out in the wash, I guess. Like it just comes out as you're interacting with folks, and that authenticity is either going to be there or it's not.
Yeah. Just real quickly, everything that Khye said, and that trusting people and being interdependent and in community with them does not mean best friends. It doesn't mean, you can be best friends, but there are a lot of people who I am deeply endeared to because I have spent significant time with them, because I've seen them in multiple scenarios and circumstances, because I've seen them show up, because they have demonstrated consistency, like those things. And they're not necessarily coming to my wedding or my birthday party, but I know if I call on them that they will act. And so that to me, I think is hard to fake. Like Khye said, that's the part that I think that is hard to fake. And so being able to build depth with people over time and over demonstrated consistency is how I have successfully built trust. And I'm bad. I give people a lot of benefit of the doubt. I'm very open and trusting from jump. It takes a lot to unearn trust from me. But it is solidified and like crystallized by action.
I don't think I need to say anything.
I want to read this definition I have been sitting with recently about what a comrade is, because that's been the theme of my year, is how to be a good comrade. And I don't know this man that I'm quoting, so don't hold me. Comrades fight on the same side, depend on and encourage each other, hold each other accountable, and expand a network by creating new nodes in the collective class struggle. Peter McLaren. I hope he ain't done no fuck shit.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, and y'all kind of spoke to this earlier, but we need physical spaces where folks can actually get trained up in this, and also virtual spaces, right, that are accessible to folks who can't leave their house or who live in rural spaces or whatever. But a lot of the way that y'all have built accountability is in these sort of casual, like repetitive, low stakes interactions with people, and I think a lot of people missed some opportunities over the last few years to build those organizing muscles. And I think that's what we're filling that gap right now with people who don't have those skills because they haven't just naturally, organically moved into community in that way. So for everybody who's watching, that's like, I don't know how to do this, show up to some of these movement spaces, right? Because it literally is just walking in the doors. Like, you don't have to have an agenda, you don't have to know what you're doing. I think sometimes people fear that, but like, we want you here. And Feminist wants you to volunteer. You know, all of these organizations want you, and you don't. Or I think sometimes there's a fear that you already have to know, you already have to have it figured out. And then really, the goal is for you to come and figure yourself out. So,
Building community sharpens our analysis. It allows for us to like refine the things that we know, that we think we know, that is then challenged in love by the things that other people know. And like that accountability piece is so critical because like I want the people that I'm in community with to like lovingly check me when I am out of pocket. If I'm out here and Rula says, Kwajelyn, come, we gotta talk. If Dartricia says, come, we gotta talk because this is happening. If Khye says, come, I need you to know that this is going down. Like, because we have built that community, because we are in relationship with one another, then I am hungry for that feedback. And it doesn't feel like an attack because the well of trust and respect is already full. It's overflowing. So like, that's the kind of, like, when conflict comes, if you are in right relationship, if you are in integrity with people, you can work through it.
And it is not a healthy community if people who have caused harm, people who have abused other people are able to exist in this freely without being checked.
That's right. That's right.
Because it's, you know, and that's, I could talk about the nonprofit industrial complex all day, but I think that's one of the big things, like, does this space, do you feel safe expressing your grievance? Do you feel safe expressing a need? Do you feel safe being your full self? A lot of spaces, that's the difference between a group or a gathering and a community. A lot of spaces will not pass that test. And that is your individual discernment of, do I feel safe? Do I feel whole? Do I feel heard? Do I feel like I share power with the people in the space? Or am I just here and, you know, I get the email every week?
I think that's a really good segue into our final virtual question, which is from Grace Ambrosi. Grace asks, how as organizers do you take care of yourselves in this work? I used to organize and found it so difficult to sustain myself as someone who is neurodivergent and experiences depression and anxiety.
Same.
We was just talking about it before we started.
Yeah. I do a lot of yoga that keeps me from snapping on people. But just, I have to be honest with my needs, especially doing this work that, you know, we don't do it for the money. However, Georgia Power does it for the money.
Sure does.
So I gotta pay my bills. And so I have to be honest about what is my capacity, being a neurodivergent person, what is my capacity, being somebody who doesn't have the highest energy levels most days. Like, I have to be honest about how much are my bills and what are the other things that I need to be able to do to live my best life. Because I think that's something that I have made it a point to learn from previous generations is that, you know, and I talk about it a lot, especially with doulas, like this doulas, it's a buzzword right now, but I don't want to look back in 10 years and there's no more doulas because everybody's burnt out. And then we're still in the same place with the maternal mortality crisis that we just kind of made a blip and kept it moving. You know, so what does it mean? What do you need to do your best work? What do you need to be your best self and to show up in these spaces as your best self? And that means boundaries. That means not doing any free work. That means taking the time and prioritizing, moving my body, eating, you know, decent foods and doing certain things that are gonna nourish and replenish myself, and you know, taking breaks. And all that is not easy. Follow the Nat Ministry if you haven't. But you know, looking at your own personal life and where can you cut some of the stuff that you don't need to do? Where can you delegate? Where can you make things easier for yourself? Because I know I'm good at overcomplicating things. So where can I make less work for myself? Where can I make sure that I'm pouring into myself first before I pour into everybody else?
I think for me, I know is definitely listening to self, listening to my body, see where I'm feeling. Having folks that are surrounded around me that love me, that can say, hey, Suki, you need to sit down. I see somebody back there that's looking at me now that can tell me. And I like, especially at work, because work can be heavy, it can be really hard, but at 10 o'clock, Suki is going to eat her snack. And I'm singing as I'm going through the clinic, it's snack time, it's snack time. And if I don't get my snack, then, you know, my friend, sister in the back will say, Suki, you need to sit down and you need to take your snack. Or I'll get a loving text message from Lula and say, how are you today? What do you need? And it's all about having that community of friends. Or I can call Christy and just talk to her about nothing about work. Just talk about just whatever. The sky was blue. My hair turned out pretty today, you know, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? And just showing up for yourself, for, you know, what's best for you. During the pandemic, it was hard working and click. Am I gonna get COVID? Am I not gonna get COVID? Is this patient gonna cuss me out because I asked them to pull their mask up on their face for the 13th time today? So it was go outside and do a walk. And I never really was an outdoor person, but it was 1 mile turned into 2, 2 miles turned into 3, and then I got a bird feeder. I learned about hummingbirds. I saw owls, and I would take pictures and send them to everybody. Name all of the hummingbirds, name the owls, but that most was filling my cup. It was just my time. It was my space. It was loving on me, which most of us don't do, is love on yourself. But with this work, it has taught me that you have to love yourself in order to love what you do and to show up. So it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. But you just have to do what's best for you and not care what anybody else thinks, because they aren't inside of you. They aren't going through what you're going through. And, you know, worst come to worst, or best come to best, as I like to call it, is get you a good therapist.
Yes.
Get you a good
One
therapist
time.
that can help show you different ways to be able to make it through the next day. Because some days you feel like you can't even get through that day, let alone the next day. So, yeah.
Oh, yes. Shout out to therapy. And I was sharing earlier, like, I think exercise is mostly terrible. However, I find that exercise is the only time that I'm fully out of my head and in my body, because all I'm focusing on is like getting oxygen into my lungs, or picking this heavy thing up, or putting this heavy thing down. And I can't think about anything else except for how bad my body hurts. So like, it feels like I can't, like, it feels meditative in a way, because I'm not worried about the world around me.
in the same way that I am most of the rest of the day. So I know that that's one of the strategies that has really helped my mental health. And if I never get a single ab, it does not matter. That is not important to me. I have no idea what I weigh, but like somebody else in movement told me, like, when life gets heavy, pick up something heavy. And that has been like a really good tool for me alongside therapy to help me feel stronger and better equipped to survive. Because, like, you know, of the many things that we could critique about the nonprofit industrial complex, there is a way in which we are taught that the mission is the most important thing, to your own detriment. You should sacrifice yourself in order to accomplish this mission. And that is normal, and that is regular. You should be grateful for whatever we give you, because you are a part of something bigger than you. And like, we are a part of something bigger than us, and we deserve to survive it. And we do not need to be ground into dust in order to accomplish upending things that we did not create, and like creating solutions for problems that we did not create. So I want us to continue to like be aligned in this work. And if there are more of us, then that allows more space for us to step back and step up and swell and contract. And so I think that that's the other thing about like building a movement, is that then it's not just held up by a handful of people who are working their fingers to the bone. It is held up by a multitude of people who are all able to contribute to helping us get to where we need to go. And there's space for us to rest and have ease and have joy and have naps and have luxury and like all of these different things that we deserve.
I think that I'm gonna close this out. I know we're about all the time. You have an addition? Okay. I'm someone who does organizing not as like my paid job, but as a job. And one thing that like a comrade, Josh has said, not in the PSL, another organization, has said is that like, I think we owe each other everything. And I do. And organizing for me is a commitment to myself and my comrades and to everybody's liberation. And we all get to show up to this work however we want. And I think if I'm burnt out in one space, I quit everything that's not organizing, because our liberation is so fucking necessary that I'm not gonna stop until we get there. And I think I lean on my comrades, and I think that's something that like everyone has articulated. When you are in an organization and you have people that support you, everyone knows I do 50 million things, and I ain't gonna quit because I like it. But I can say to my comrade, like, I'm not gonna make this at a rally today because I am tired, or I need help with this thing so that I can accomplish this other thing. Sorry. But it is a commitment.
Yes.
It is a shared commitment, this work. And so I get like the questions around like burnout and capacity, and there are ways to show up and take breaks and ask for help and lean on other people. But like, I am of the mind, and it's a little more militant, that like, you don't quit because like, what we gonna do, not be free?
Unacceptable.
Unacceptable. Because I want liberation in my lifetime. I don't give a fuck what nobody else is saying.
Period.
I want socialism now.
Yeah, my addition is quite small, but after that, one of the things that was important about the process of this project was to offer everyone a moment to step back and reflect. And I think it's undermined, especially when you've been doing the work consistently for the last few years. Like, we've been through it as a culture, as a society in the last few years. A moment, 2 hours, to reflect, to have our undivided attention, to look back and see like what all you've accomplished. It's huge what you've accomplished, and it does not feel that way when you're in the weeds of it. And so to me, that was like one of the critical things about, you know, a process of care and documenting, is that like throughout the oral history, you can just take a step back and appreciate what has happened so far.
So with that, thank you so much for our amazing participants, panelists. We are just gonna close this out, but I'm just gonna say things in your printout, which we'll send a PDF to people online in an email. You'll find some questions to reflect on after this event. We encourage you to share your reflections with us via our email, which you can find on that sheet. Donate to the Feminist Health Center, Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center, and our local abortion fund, Access Reproductive Care Southeast, and to Charis Circle that hosted us and put on this program for us tonight. Again, we submit to sustain our communities, our community spaces. Give money to everybody if that's all you can do. And get involved. I know Feminist is always accepting volunteers. They got plenty of work that y'all can do. And like Suki said, at Arc Southeast, you can take people to get their abortions. I love doing that shit. I love driving people and sitting with people at the clinic for their appointments. And with that, thank you for coming out.